Mesdames et messieurs,
The greatest festival of our contemporary society, the Olympic Games, is about to begin.
this is gonna be close.
Oh! They're all completely gassed! They've given it everything on the Globalbacken! Oh, yeah! Go! Oh!
Brilliant. But that is an Olympic championship.
Ready?
Hello and welcome to another episode of Keep the Flame Alive, the podcast for fans of the Olympics and Paralympics. If you love the games, we are the show for you. I am your host, Jill Jaracz, joined as always by my lovely co-host, Alison Brown. Alison, hello, how are you?
So you know how I'm always saying, don't let me near weapons, like when we talk to the
Yeah.
fencers or we talk to the shooters?
What happened?
There's a reason for that. I don't know if you can see the giant bandage on my
What did
arm.
you do?
I made cookies, okay? So I'm not even safe in my own kitchen. So no, probably as much as I would love to try ski jumping and learning how to ride a bicycle, clearly probably not a good idea.
Well, okay, so what happened? Was that a burn? Was
That's
it
a burn.
spatula? Oh,
No, that's a
You know,
burn.
that happens. That happens. It's not just you. Plenty of burns.
Yeah, it's a you cannot. I'm not. You can't see how big this is. It was ridiculous. It was a cookie accident.
Were the cookies good?
The cookies were really good.
Well, you know, you got to take one for the team sometimes, I guess. I'm guessing you needed a recipe for your cookies.
I do.
Did you get
I
that
can
from a
never
book?
cook without a recipe.
All right. Well, you needed a book. And guess what? World Book Day was this week. So if you are interested in books on the Olympics and Paralympics, we have got some great selections over at our bookshop.org storefront. Any purchases made through our storefront may help us earn commissions, which go toward getting us to Milan for the games next year. And with the lowering of the dollar, this trip is getting more expensive by the day. If you're in the market for books, please go to bookshop.org/shop/flamealivepod to shop today.
And that supports independent bookstores as well as us.
Today, oh my gosh, I am so excited about this interview.
It is so up your alley.
We are talking track cycling today, specifically the women's team pursuit event at Paris 2024. The Germans were the defending Olympic champions and the Brits were the reigning world champions. The U.S. team of Jennifer Valente, Lily Williams, Chloe Dygert, and Kristen Faulkner was deemed an outlier at best, but they had a plan. That plan was Project 405, a plan devised by USA Cycling's Ryan Cooper, who used a whole swath of data analytics tools, including machine learning and real-time analytics, to optimize rider selection, race strategy, and aerodynamic efficiency. If it all went according to Ryan's plan, they could top the podium with a time of 4:05. The team did better than that. They ousted Team GB in the semis and then smoked New Zealand in the finals to win gold with a time of 4:04.302. We talked with USA Cycling's Ryan Cooper, the man behind the plan, to find out its origins, what the process was, and how they executed it. We interviewed him on March 3rd, 2025, just after he had been nominated for the Franz Edelman Award, which is kind of like the Nobel Prize for Operations Research. His fellow nominees were giants in the field: Amazon, Flipkart, Lufthansa, SF Express, and WM, which you might know as Waste Management. And yet, Ryan's work beat them all.
He won the gold, just like his team.
He did. USA Cycling was named the 2025 Edelman winner on April 8th. So this interview reflects his thoughts pre-win. Needless to say, USA Cycling is thrilled about this honor. Yes, I have tears thinking about it. I'm so excited and happy for him and USA Cycling for all that they did to put into this project, and just the unique way that countries are using data and trying to find whatever edge they can wherever they can in a legal way to help teams excel. So one final note, Ryan talks about how Team GB Cycling has a ton of funding. Team B announced funding for 2028, and that is just under £39 million for cycling. 30 of that is going to the Olympics, 9 is for the Paralympics. That will be all cycling disciplines, road, track, BMX, and mountain bike. And that's just their LA 2028 spending. USA Cycling's funds, slightly less than that. In 2023, USA Cycling spent about $17 million on everything that the organization does. So, with an incredible budgetary disadvantage, Team USA really won big with this project. And let's listen to Ryan tell us all about it. Take a listen. Ryan Cooper, thank you so much for joining us. When did you get interested in harnessing data for cycling?
That's a great question. I actually, if I go back, this is probably 2006, 2007. I just started my master's program in operations research, and I was working at a small defense kind of startup and working on all kinds of different projects. But we were a small group. I just moved back to Dallas, and I was trying to train for Ironman triathlon at the same time as doing full-time work and trying to go back to school and trying to train at a decent level. So kind of at like an competitive amateur level. And I thought, well, I'm going to get a coach, and I'm going to have this coach, and everything's going to work out great. But span of control, this coach had, I don't know, probably 20 other clients or something like that. And they just couldn't keep track of my schedule. So I was traveling a lot, and I didn't have access to a bike all the time. I didn't have access to a pool all the time. And so I said, well, why don't I just use some of this knowledge and operations research and kind of applied math, or like this optimization type math, to build a schedule around a training schedule around my work, around my school, around kind of my strengths and weaknesses. And so I built this math model kind of around all of those things. And that was kind of the first foray into using data in a endurance sports type of capacity. That dovetailed into a small company called Optimized Training Labs, which I launched with a buddy. And to get kind of like a marketing push for that, we created a separate service called Best Bike Split, which tried to give optimal pacing strategies to cyclists and to triathletes. So give your power profile, a course, we'll break the course down by different direction changes and elevation changes. And we'll say, how much power should you output at every part of the course to get your fastest time for your given capabilities? And originally that was supposed to be kind of this marketing thing to get them into the training. But that took off much, much faster than the kind of AI training kind of thing, or the smart training thing. And if I step back and think about it a little bit, I go, oh, okay, well, a bunch of coaches wanted to use it, athletes wanted to use it, so we're not competing against coaches. It was a tool everybody could use. And it was a tool that really wasn't out there on the market. So around 2012, we launched that. And so that was kind of the first real use of applied math, data analytics for like this prescriptive type modeling.
So obviously that kind of thinking took off then, in a way.
It did. It was, we launched I think at the end of 2012, and by end of 2013, Trek Factory Racing had reached out, and they had this model that a person, Paul Harder, I don't know if he's still at Trek or not, but they had an internal model that they were using. And I don't know if it was built in MATLAB or how they built it internally. But one of the things that we wanted to do is we were going to take our model and their model, and we're going to do this big comparison, like comparative analysis. And it was really fun because we used all the same inputs. And so we had a specific course we were going to use and wind data that we were going to use and kind of do the comparison. And sure enough, we ran all the data through it, and the models came out almost identical. So same kind of strategy, same estimated time for this particular athlete. And so everything that was coming out, and it was exactly as they kind of expected it to. The difference was that ours took like 0.2 seconds to run, and theirs took 6 hours to run. And so it was kind of the like light bulb moment that went off that goes, okay, now we have something that you could run every potential scenario that they want to run, any wind direction, any wind amp, any kind of wind speed that they wanted to run, any variation of those type of things, or athlete CDA or like aerodynamics that they wanted to look at, and do it in a fraction of the time that they had previously. So for the 2014 tour, we ended up going out for the 2014 tour and helping. There's only one time trial at that particular year, but we went out and further and tested and ran simulations with Trek for that tour. And so it was really fun. By the end of that year, Trinity Peaks had acquired us. It was an interesting story, but they we were using some of the, I guess, variables or TSS, training stress score, normalized power, some of the kind of Training Peaks proprietary variables, or copyrighted variables. And so we got a call saying, hey, you're using our copyrighted stuff. And then I was like, uh-oh. But it was really fun because he's like, well, don't worry about that. You just have to sign this thing. It's, it's open. You just have to sign and give us attribution for it. So we did that. And he said, but while I've got you on the phone, this is Gear Fisher, one of the founders and CEO at the time. So while I have you on the phone, would you guys like to come up and meet? We'd love to talk to you about the app. And so we flew up there, and several months later, they did a acquisition and we became part of Training Peaks. And then I spent 7 years at Training Peaks in various roles.
So when does USA Cycling come calling?
Yep. So after 7 years at Training Peaks, we did some really fun stuff. I left and I went to Amazon for a couple of years and kind of learned how the big companies do things. Very interesting learning experience. They kind of say, a friend of mine worked at Amazon for, I want to say 5 or 6 years. And he came to my birthday and I told him about this offer. And he said, whether you work there for 6 months or 6 years, it's worth it just to kind of get this experience and see what it's like. And so I ended up going there. And it was about a year in when Jim Miller, Chief Sports Performance at USA Cycling, and I were talking, and he started to tell me, and this is before, this 2023, this is before Glasgow, the Super World Championship in Glasgow. And he said USA Cycling was really starting to put an emphasis on data, and what I call is we have a lower budget than some of these teams like British Cycling that have, I don't know if everybody saw it announced after Paris, but a very, very large budget set aside for LA. And so we have to, as USA Cycling, have to have a very outsized ROI. So we have to have a very big return on our investment. And we do that through strategic, initiatives. And one of those strategic initiatives is tech and innovation. And Jim was stressing that we were going to build out kind of this top-down view of data analytics and tactical modeling. And so if you think about a top-down view of a strategic level, where you look at where do we think we have the best shot at winning medals? Where do we think we can grow the best talent? Where do we have crossover talent? So those kind of tactical level decisions, strategic level decisions. And then in those disciplines, you start to break down the tactical level kind of modeling. So if you think about time trial, for instance, and if I look back at best bike split, you can say, okay, we're going to look at this course and we're going to break down this course and the aerodynamics and the power requirements of this specific course and the athletes we have, and say, how do we best ride this specific course, whether it's in Paris or in LA for 28. Other disciplines, we say, where can maybe we haven't performed as well, but we know we have the talent and we know we have the athletes, but we're missing some key ingredients. And can we do through data, through crossover athletes, so Kristen Faulkner, for instance, coming over the track, or even testing other athletes coming over from mountain bike or from other disciplines that still meet the kind of characteristics that we're looking for, where we can have an outsized return on those kind of investments that we're looking at. So that's where the kind of pitch came from Jim, is to say, I could come in and really help spearhead this analytics group and what we're trying to build here. And as fun as Amazon is, and getting all the packages to all the people as fast as possible, which is a fun, challenging problem, it's not quite as fun as gold medals.
You're not going to get argument from us on that one.
I still get all the packages. They still all come to the front door. But yeah.
So for the U.S., what was actually happening for them in the sport? Is they're close to medals, but not necessarily getting them.
Yeah, if we look at Tokyo, we had 3 medals in Tokyo. This was before I came on board, and COVID really did a number. So both in terms of funding and just events went to nothing, staffing levels were very low. And so we kind of limped through those games, came up with 3 medals. The goal going in to Paris was pretty high. So internally, we had projected 7 medals. And so part of our internal tracking is we have these kind of medal expectancy models that we do. So the USOPC also does this. So the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee has this ongoing tracking, medal tracking. So we take that's across all sports and all NGBs. So we layer in our expert knowledge and kind of do a finer grain medal expectancy. And so we have what we consider high probability medals, and then we have kind of on the fence medals and our conversion medals. And those are the ones that we really try and focus on. So if you look at historic high probability medals, we look at things like BMX freestyle, where we have 2 very strong athletes on the women's side, and then some strong athletes on the men's side as well. We look at time trial, where Chloe is typically a very strong athlete, especially if she's healthy going in, or Omnium for Jen in the track. And so those are our medals that we kind of put into this like high probability or kind of high confidence bucket. Then the conversion medals, we look at areas where we're on the edge in terms of probability. We're in the top 3 or the top 6, but there's if we think about like a low clustering of probability. So no team or no individual jumps out as being so much stronger than anybody else. And so there's a couple of events that fit into that bucket for this last Olympic cycle. Madison is one of those where we thought we might be able to sneak out a medal. We ended up in 4th, right? And so it's one of those where the conversion didn't end up on our side, whereas team pursuit, obviously, the conversion did end up on our side. And that's where we spent a lot of focus on, because we thought for that particular discipline that there's so much strategy involved and there's so much that you can model out and that's not as variable. So if you look at BMX race, there's so many things that can go wrong, and it's not so cut and dry. Whereas something like team pursuit, the variables are, you can model everything and you can kind of go in with some amount of confidence. Now on the day, anything can happen, but it's a lot more controllable than something like BMX race or BMX freestyle or Madison or something where there's a lot of complexities to it.
Why was 4:05 the magic time?
So yeah, 4:05. This is something that's interesting. This is something from my Amazon days. They have a working backwards approach. So you look at the end result and then you work backwards. And so for this one, what we did is say, what do we likely need to hit to get a gold medal? And so if we looked at all the data, you'll notice a 4:05 is actually wouldn't have won Tokyo. So it was a 4:04.2, and so the world record. But Tokyo was a super fast track. So very good conditions, low air density, extremely fast track. And so we looked at Paris and we said, what are the typical conditions in Paris? And then had a different model that essentially said, okay, based on the progression of times and the conditions that we're expecting in Paris, what do we need to hit to have a probability of, or a higher probability of a gold medal? So we had one number to hit for what we thought would get us in contention for a top 3. And then we had another number that would get us in what we thought was a contention for a gold medal. So 4:05 is what we said. If we go sub 4:05, we're in contention for a top of the podium. If we go sub 4:07, then we're potentially in contention for bronze. And so those were kind of our target numbers going in, given the air density that we were expecting. So that can float. So if it was I believe that was at a 1.14 air density, but at Glasgow it was like 1.16. So it'd be slower. But I think in Tokyo it was like a 1.09, so it'd be much faster. So yeah, if we do a physics lesson, the lower the air density, the easier it is to cut through. So your same power output goes faster in the lower air density.
To us, that meant how hot it was in that velodrome.
Did
Oh
you
yeah,
expect
they'll
Did they,
crank.
like,
Yeah.
did you expect it to be that hot?
I did, only because I know that when you're trying to go for fast times, they crank up the heat and humidity. So like both are gonna be. It is the first time you go in there, you're like, what is happening? Why is it like this? Why am I sweating immediately? It's pretty. If you're not used to it, if you've never been to one and you're going as a spectator, doesn't matter what the temperature is outside, make sure that you are layered up, because you're going to be taking off whatever coat and whatever else you have going in for sure. So
It was hot.
And it really varied throughout a day.
for sure, yeah. And they'll do it depending on what the event is too. I think like the conditions, they'll try and if you want a fast track for the events that are very time focused, right? And so you'll tend to have the temperature and the humidity cranked up for when they want the really fast track.
What about the track itself? Because if I remember correctly, Paris did a fair amount of refurbishment to that track. So did you know what kind of condition the actual wood was going to be?
We did, because they had a test event, I believe, there, and I don't know if they did the refurbishment before that. I'm sure they did it around there, but we expected it to be fast. It'll be interesting to see how LA is, because LA is not as fast a track, and they're going to do a refurbishment there as well. So it'll be interesting to see. Like, luckily we have kind of home track advantage, so we'll be able to see what the speeds look like on it. But we expected a fast track, but again, not quite as fast as Tokyo was.
You've got 4 phases of Project 405. How long of a time period was the whole thing?
We started on it right after Glasgow. So Glasgow was a bit of a disappointment. And so Glasgow 2023, Super Worlds, first time they've done a Super Worlds, which is kind of, to me, it was almost more than the Olympics, because you had more events. And so you had both para and cycling all together, and you had all of the cycling events. So an expanded schedule. So downhill mountain biking, regular mountain biking, relay mountain biking. And then on the track side, you had all the track events, so additional track events than you have. So individual pursuits and all these other things. So much more than you have at the Olympics in terms of cycling events. But we went in and we had a super strong team pursuit team, and everybody came in healthy. And so we were expecting some really fast times. And we had been to the wind tunnel, and we had these vortex suits, and it was we had to get these homologated. So essentially we had to get 19 different skin suits worn throughout the different races in the track, but they all had to be worn on the track so that we had them as options for the Olympics. So this was our last chance to kind of get all these skin suits at least worn once in a race. And so the rules in track are that all the equipment has to be at least raced to be able to be used in the Olympics. So that's not the case in other disciplines. But for track cycling, that was the case. And so we had, I think, 19 of these skin suits that needed to be worn at some point in at least one race by the different riders. And they were individually made for the different riders. So we really needed to make all the finals and hit all the things that we needed to hit.
So if I can interrupt, why 19 different suits? What was special about different ones, and if they're tailored to? So does somebody have like 4 and another person they all have different numbers, and what's different about each of them, or what are you trying to?
So they all had different cuts, but a lot of them had different fabrics in different places. So you'd have different kind of fabrics on the shoulders, different fabrics on different types of panels, I guess, that made up these. None of them had seams, so they're kind of like glued together. And so you'd have different panels in different sections. And so it was kind of this mix and match to see what was going to work better on different riders. And so some riders have broader shoulders, some riders have different body types. And so you'd have these different type of textures on different panels for the different types of riders. But then also you had some that were designed specifically for mass start events, some that were designed for team pursuit like events or time trial events. And so somebody like Chloe may have 3 or 4 different suits. Somebody like Jen, who does both mass start and team pursuit, would have 5 different suits. And so each of them had 3D body scans, so they were all custom fit for each rider. So a lot of time spent in the wind tunnel trying to perfect both position, but then also the different suits for the different riders to give as options. So a lot of times we prototyped all of these things, but then we wanted to make sure that we had those as options afterwards so that we could continue to test. If they hadn't been ridden in competition, then we'd have to mark it off and not have it as an option for the Olympics. Additionally, if we wanted to, use some of these different textures on the men's side or on other riders, then they needed to go through that process.
Do you ever get pushback? Well, there's so many ways you can get pushback, but specifically when, you're going into a world championship, obviously the cyclists want to do as well as possible, but you're also trying to collect data. So they could be sacrificing their world championship result for this additional data to then transfer over to the Olympics. So is that ever an issue for you as a data analyst? You're like, no, I need this data, but they're like, no, I want to win.
Yes. Yeah, it was a little contentious at parts because especially with some of the suits, if you're trying to ask somebody, the last thing you want to ask is for somebody to try something new on race day. And so suddenly we're on a tight timetable and we need to get somebody to wear this. But conveniently, the one time that we did need somebody to wear the suit, and that was kind of like a very key time that they, medal was on the line. They did wear it, and they still ended up winning the medal. So everything worked out well. So that was very good. So we didn't end up having to worry about it. We did have to get one of the guys to wear one of the women's suits because we couldn't get it homologated. And so he was the last chance to get this one to get homologated through. And I think he was already kind of out of contention for the men's Omnium. And so he wore it, and I can't remember which race he wore it, but if you go back and you might be able to see it, it starts ripping about halfway through the race. And by the end of the race, it's pretty torn.
Definitely not 3D printed for him.
We got no, it was not for him, and I'm not sure how he squeezed into it, to be honest. And
Can you just
yes.
glue that back together and it's still homologated?
No, it just had to be written. So like they can remake it. So it's not that specific suit. It was that cut, that style, so
okay.
we can make any copy we want after the fact. But yeah, just
do
that was the
another
only version
race.
we had at the time. Yeah.
That's all I can hear is like, oh, can you do another race this weekend?
Yeah.
We got another suit for you.
And that was it. And the World Champs was the last race that we could get everything checked off. And that goes for wheels and goes for everything. So not just the suits. So everything that we wanted to have an option, tires, etc., everything we wanted to have an option for on the track for Paris, that was our last chance to get everything written. So back to your original question, so after Team Pursuit in Glasgow, where, everybody's power levels, all the riders, they were in amazing form going into that race. And so it was disappointing to come away sixth place and missing out on the medal rounds. And so we sat down with the high performance team, and Gary and Greg, the director, and Jim and I, we said, okay, let's take a step back and say, what is it that we need to hit? Let's find out what our North Star is. And then once we find out what our North Star is, then we can start to work and say, how do we get there? First, figure out what we need to hit, and then start to kind of do those steps, those 4 steps that we talked about. But first, we just need to even see what it is that we need to get to. And then once we see what we need to get to, then we can work backwards from there. And so in November, the World Champs was August of 23. So by November, we pitched our first Project 405. And so that was the first presentation that we gave. We had come up with the model for what we needed to hit by Paris. And we said, okay, here's what we need to hit. And we had come up with some preliminary power metrics, CDA metrics, and kind of came up with these buckets of, say, what is your FTP, your CP20, like essentially what does your power level need to be? What is your sprint or your kind of max power need to be at? what does your CDA or your aerodynamics need to look like, and came up with these core, for lack of a better word, like if we're in the business world, we call them KPIs. So it'd be like, what are your key performance indicators that we need to hit to be able to hit those, to be able to achieve those numbers? And so by January of 2024, we had the goal target, and then we had the broken down targets for the athletes of, this is what a prototypical gold medal athlete for team pursuit would look like. This is what a prototypical medal capable athlete would look like. And then here's how we look compared to those so that we could track against it. And it doesn't mean that everybody's going to look like that. In fact, we'll have a lot of athletes that surpass one area, but may need work in a different area. But it gave us a guideline to start to track towards, and gave everybody key defined goals to be able to start to say, okay, as we're making progress, we know that if everybody gets close to these numbers, we have a really good shot to being able to get there.
What was the athlete response to that when you broke it down into specific goals and different sections?
It was really good, actually. So we did at one of the camps before athlete selection, we brought, I think there were 7 or 8 athletes. I think there were 7 athletes for the 4 spots plus the alternative. So they came into camp. We did a big group kind of presentation with this, with everything laid out. And then we had every individual athlete, we did an hour-long presentation with just the one-on-one athlete, with myself in the high performance team. And I believe their coaches, if their coaches wanted to be part of it. And we broke it down and said, for them specifically, here's where they are, here's what we need from them, and here's why, and here's the math behind it. And we can go into as much detail or as little detail as we want. And some athletes want to go very much into detail. Some athletes, they say, what do I need to hit? All right, that's good. I'll go do it. And so there's just different mentalities with different athletes. But overall, everybody was very receptive to it, because I think they realized, if I can go and do this and everybody else does their part, then, we're going to come together and be able to do something pretty special and pretty awesome. And they had enough faith in the numbers. I've worked with several of them previously, whether it's through their pro teams or individually through other projects, that I think they had enough faith in the numbers to feel good about the outcomes.
One of the elements, so you had 7 athletes for 4 spots, is all the different combinations.
Yeah.
And you were doing data analysis on, if we put A with B with C with D, now we're going to swap out D for R, how that all worked together. How was that? I mean, I hear the athletes accepting it, but there's a lot more data analytics to putting together a team. So kind of how did they respond, and how the coaches respond when you're saying, no, this person is not going to help you win, especially when you're saying no?
Yeah. And, I think when you break it down and when you give your methodology and you say, here's the methodology, and you write it out and you kind of stick to it, and you say, ultimately it's the coach's decision, right? And we do data, and we show here's what's likely to happen based on the data. And we do that for the coaches, we do that for the director, we do that for the selection committee and for the athletes. And so when you show the methodology and you show the outcome, it tends to, there's no real, I don't know the right word for it, but I guess there's no real hiding from it. So it's fairly black and white, and you can see it. Now there's intangibles that we do bring into it. And I think that's the area where, you can have somebody that meets all the categories, right? It's aerodynamic, is super strong, has very good power numbers, but track cycling is a very skill-based sport. And so that's the intangible area where we have to definitely bring in all the coaching knowledge and all of that as a kind of this weighted factor that gets brought in. Another area is like being able to start or not. So there's only certain people that can kind of withstand the being in P1 or the first position. And so if you look at that, Jen Valente is arguably the best starter in the world in terms of team pursuit starter, but she's also one of the strongest just team pursuer in general, or track cyclists in general. So do you have her start, or do you have her just in the lineups because she's so strong? And if you don't have her start, then who do you have that can kind of slot in there? These are other areas that you have to take into consideration when you're looking at like the model output. And so those are the kind of intangibles that you bring into the analysis that aren't hard data, right? That's more of a soft skill that gets factored.
Did anything happen last minute, like this person got hurt or this person was sick, and then all of a sudden you're remodeling day before?
Oh yeah, so we remodeled. I mean, based on the conditions too. So you like constantly kind of remodeling based on the conditions, right up until most of it's to confirm. There wasn't that much that was changing in terms of like strategic, like we weren't going to change order, for instance, and likely not going to change pool strategy, but we were constantly remodeling to say, okay, well, let's say air density changed a lot. Let's say it was like 1.17 or something versus 1.14, which doesn't sound like a lot when you just say it, but if you were actually riding, that would be the difference of like 4 seconds or something. Like it's pretty substantial. So if you're riding, like there's a lot of fatigue that could set in if you're having to do an extra half lap or something like that. If one person's having to pull an extra half lap. So you may change slight tweaks in your pull strategy towards the end based on some of those. Everything stayed pretty much between 1.13 and 1.4 the whole time. So there wasn't really any change there. However, we did get Chloe crashed in the time trial early, so it's coming off of that. Kristen obviously won the road race, which was awesome. But you have some fatigue built up, so both of them had fatigue built up, and you can kind of start to see it towards the gold medal round a little bit, just in the final kind of laps of the gold medal round. So you take those kind of things into account. Another thing that you also take into account in between the qualifying or initial round and then the subsequent rounds, riding on the track solo versus riding on the track with two teams. And this is something that's interesting, and I don't know if you felt it, but when there's two teams and you get this air that kind of gets swirled around in there, and it acts almost like a bit of a tailwind. So if you have two match teams that come around, you can get a little bit extra boost almost, and so you go a little faster with two teams, or you tend to go a little bit faster with two teams than you do when you're solo. So we factor those kind of things into the model too.
One of the other things I thought about when looking at optimization, especially on a women's team, how does women's periods take into consideration when you're trying to meet performance goals or, looking at that? How much does that factor in?
That's a good question. I know there's a lot of research on that. For us, or for like my modeling, it's usually like we kind of have the expected power output is kind of a given coming in. However, like that's a really good point in terms of what that expected power should be going in. And so we worked a lot with Lindsay Golich out of USOPC. And so she did all the physical tracking in terms of physiology. So she had weekly power metrics that she was tracking for everybody. In terms of the CDA, we did all the wind tunnel testing, but then we also had the on-track verification. And so for those, I relied on inputs coming in from the coaches and then from the USOPC team to run into the model. But that's a good question. I'll have to ask her like what she did on that.
As an athlete, how hard is it to memorize the game plan?
I don't know. I think it's pretty like drilled into you. And so like the game plan itself was, I think, pretty straightforward. If I looked at like the difference, and this is something that we do in this paper and we'll stress it in the presentation, is the difference between Glasgow and Paris. And then having Jen, some of the early model outputs were really interesting, and they mimicked some, I believe, what Canada or New Zealand did several years ago in a race where they had their initial rider, their P1 rider, do a massive pull off the front. It was just a single pull for like 1K, like a huge, massive pull off the front and then drop. And we had looked at that early on, and then subsequent model runs based on updated data. And once we added an additional like fatigue, essentially reconstitution, if you think about like recovery. So like we started to add better recovery metrics into the model. So that strategy ended up losing out to the strategy that was the final strategy. But yeah, it ended up not being overly complex, I guess. And so it was pretty short pull durations. Most things weren't over 2 laps. And so most things were like a lap and a half. So Jen did a very long pull at the beginning. And then everybody did a fairly short first pull. So between 2 to 1.5 to 2 laps. Then Jen came back to the front and pretty much gave everything she had left for her second pull, gassed herself out, and then pulled off. And then everybody else was still on this kind of shorter lap rotation, so 1.5 to 2. And the reason for that is, if you look at the model, is that still gave enough time to kind of let our riders get enough recovery to still maintain that high power output and still maintain speed without giving up too much in over rotating. So we're not rotating every lap or every half lap and then losing out time with this kind of constant rotation.
What was it like watching the race for you?
It was awesome. Yeah, it was. I was trying to explain this. Oh man, I went up to Colorado Springs last week and we did our LA 28 kind of kickoff and trying to figure out what our medal goal is going to be and all that. We talked about winning and what it does. And Brendan, our CEO, he experienced his first gold medal experience was Kristen's road gold medal. And I can't remember how he described it, but I think there was a picture of him grabbing Tanner Putt, our director of road, and just like squeezing him so hard and just like, I don't know if he was running, I don't know, it was just this sheer exuberance in his face. And like, it's very hard to describe this moment of just pure excitement to be witnessing something, and excited for the team, excited for all the athletes, excited for the coaching staff, excited for everybody, but just in the nation. Like, you get to see like this gold medal, and for Gary, like, to go out, like, he had won a gold medal in team pursuit, the coach, and he retired after, and to see him go out with that was spectacular. And so been fortunate enough to see a lot of projects from kind of the 0 to 1 stage in my career across a bunch of different industries. And this was by far the highlight. It was really, really, really fun to be a part of. Yeah, it's hard to describe. It was really, really cool.
There was a lot of press about Kristen Faulkner winning both golds and seemingly coming out of nowhere. But did you go, well, we had the numbers for that. We knew this was possible.
Oh, yeah. It's funny, like, she's so strong. She is an amazing athlete. And I think what's interesting is, and I know they made a pretty big deal out of like kind of coming out of nowhere on the road race. And I think the quoted thing was like a 6% chance or something like that on the road, which is actually not bad. Like, that's pretty good, because the highest anybody had was like a 10% chance. If you look at like if you break down we look at like ELO ratings. So if you think about like chess or something like that, or it's usually used for chess. And so if I look at all of the kind of one-day classics, so something that's similar to the road race, and you look at like just the one-day kind of classic type races or the major stages of the big tours, so not every stage, but like either kind of the major stages, and you break those down and you look at head-to-head comparisons, and you look at like an ELO type rating system. So you look at pairwise comparisons of one person versus this person, and they win, and then who beat the other person. So you kind of look at all these pairwise comparisons. So Katie Lepecki was maybe at a 8% or 9% chance, and the Dutch are always around there. And so Kristen was our highest rated person. So it's not like she was kind of came out of nowhere. So you had a 6% chance, which was still pretty high. We expected her to be more competitive. She had a late season crash, so going into U.S. Nationals, she wasn't at peak performance because she had a concussion, I believe, earlier in the season. And so she came back for Nationals, didn't win the time trial, was very disappointed in not winning the time trial. And Taylor Knibb, a triathlete who's also will be a very strong cycling contender coming up if she chooses to focus on cycling in the future. But Taylor Knibb won, and I know Kristen was disappointed in that. But being able to focus on track and the energy systems that it takes to do really, really well on track, I'm convinced helped her on the road too, because when she needed to go in and have that power on that climb to bridge the gap, and then once she bridged the gap to take off, and as we saw, no one had anything to respond. And I think all the track work and all the effort and everything that she put in really, really helped her. And the time off from like being able to actually recover from injuries and from everything else on the road. It was amazing to watch. It was awesome. But yeah, I don't think she's going to be a dark horse anymore for sure.
Also didn't hurt that that day felt like the inside of a velodrome.
No, that's true. That's right. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, there was no lack of humidity that day either, was there?
Analytics gets a lot of heat for taking the fun out of the. You're right. You're nodding your head. What I love it. I know Jill loves this kind of stuff. What's your response to the purists who are like, you're ruining sports?
Yeah, it's so. I want to say, when did that start? I think it started.
Moneyball with Moneyball.
It started with Moneyball, and it started Moneyball with baseball, and then in cycling, I want to say it probably started with Team Sky, and Chris Froome staring at his bike computer going up the mountains. And I do get it. I do understand, and I see both sides of it. And I love to go out and ride my bike without a bike computer, and so it's funny. I built a whole company where we try and help people go as fast as possible on as little power as possible, and built it for type A triathletes originally that like to check off boxes, and every single new section of road is a new box to check off with a new power target. And yet I've rarely used my own software to read. So there's that. So I totally get it. But in this world of high performance sports, I mean, essentially it's an arms race. It is a big money technical sport now. And I mean, what used to be, I guess, like an advantage is now table stakes. Meaning, if you watched a BMX race, this is where it kind of, the light bulb went off. If you watched BMX race in Paris, the Dutch had aero shin guards, right? They had shoe covers, or I guess dust protectors, because you can't have shoe covers, so you can call it whatever you want. But, it was lace dust protectors, what we call them something. But it is, every country is going to do everything that they can to kind of have this advantage. And so if you don't do it, you're going to get left in the dust. And so it's kind of, now you have to, and so you have to look at what's the next thing to do. And so to ruin the sport, there's still strategy, there's still big moves can still work. You see it all the time. You see Pogacar make moves that you go, why did he do that? And then they stick. You still see it in gravel racing. You see a lot of these big moves that'll happen 40K or 80K or 100K from the finish. So I think there's still a lot of non-analytics out, especially in the road side, especially if you look at mountain biking, you look at a lot of that. When you get into the time trial, you get into track racing against the clock, then I think that's where the analytics and the money ball are really, there's not much, it's kind of table stakes at this point.
It is fascinating to think about the littlest tiny details that can impact performance. And, what about countries that don't have the capability of doing this and could have the talent? Do you see that out there?
We do, yeah. I mean, I for sure I see that out there, and you see athletes, for better or worse, jumping from country to country, which is kind of a weird thing. I mean, somebody from Australia just went to the UK, I believe, and one of the men's sprint riders. And so you do see some kind of nationality jumping because of that, because these other countries have either a bigger budget or have their equipment. But I will say that innovations in AI and innovations in the access to data, we can do stuff. USA Cycling has a small data team that you're kind of looking at most of it. But as I mentioned earlier, outsized our ROI. And so we can do a lot through partnerships, through USOPC, through universities that are willing to help. And so I think you can do a lot without having a huge budget. It's just you have to do it through other means. So you have to do it through partnerships, through universities willing to extend help or to give facilities or internships or access to a bigger collective group of manpower. So One thing I do think is another frontier that hasn't really been tapped, and it's not my area of expertise, but we do have people looking into it on the nutrition side. So I think there's still a lot of area to explore there. And so I think when you talk about energy use and energy systems, the more more calories you can bring in and the more you can like actually consume and be able to digest it and use it. And I think that on the pro tour side, that's an area where they're really kind of pushing boundaries just in terms of amount of carbs that you can take in and be able to utilize per hour. So the old rule of thumb was you could do 60 to 90 grams of carbs per hour. And now, from what I'm hearing, at least on some of these teams, they're at about 140 or 150 grams of carbs per hour. And so if you just think about that calorie wise, they just have so much more energy to use on these climbs. And so you see times on these climbs that are just so incredibly fast because they just had more energy than they used to.
Oh, that's fascinating. Something to look for.
Yeah, it's an area that I'm really interested in. It's not my area of expertise, but yes, that's something that we would definitely want to see if we can capitalize on. So
Excellent. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for taking time and talking with us about this. Best of luck in the Edelman choices, but it's a great honor, and we're looking forward to seeing what USA Cycling comes up with for LA 2028.
awesome. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much, Ryan. You can find out more about USA Cycling at usacycling.org. On Facebook, Insta, and X, they are at USA Cycling. On TikTok, they are USA_cycling. We will also post videos of the final races on our website, flamealivepod.com. That is some good watching. Watching that semi-final match was so good. And then just New Zealand was like nothing compared to what the USA was putting out. So incredible performance by the women, especially considering how Kristen and Chloe were coming off the road race after this too. And just incredible.
Oh, molto bigliette.
Ooh, yes. Kyoto News has reported that 60% of Winter Olympics tickets have already been sold. Italy, USA, and Germany are the top 3 national ticket buyers. Also, 110,000 applications for 18,000 volunteer positions have been received. So, again, if you've applied for a volunteer position and don't get it, know that there was a lot of competition. More than half of the applications for volunteers are under 35, and also ticket buyers were quite young too, so they were very excited about that. In a different Kyoto News article, IPC President Andrew Parsons said he's been seeing a good investment in terms of accessibility in the region, particularly in tourism, getting more accessibility in hotels and in the transportation system, and also training hotel staff on how to be more inclusive. That turns out to be one of the bigger legacies of a Paralympics, especially in Europe.
Right, because in Europe, there's not a lot of laws like ADA in the United States, and that's Americans with Disabilities Act that changed a lot of accessibility for public buildings and hotels. And I would expect a lot of these old European ski towns never thought about wheelchair access or access for visually impaired or all those things that when you've got a newer build is part of the deal. So now you're trying to retrofit, and we saw a ton of this in Paris. How do you retrofit those metro stations that are 100 years old beneath a city that's even older? So European cities have this unique challenge, and then European mountain towns have an even more complex challenge. So, yes, that just the idea that you have to think about this. Like, wheelchair users wanna go skiing.
Mhm.
Okay, well, now you need wheelchair access hotel rooms for them. Just those small things. Not small if that's you, but just, "Oh, we have to think about this now." The
Right.
Paralympics does that for towns.
Right. And yeah, it's not just putting on a sporting event, it's working on making the area a lot more user friendly for people who have different needs. And I've started to see stuff about Paris, and I'm going to dig into that this week about their accessibility legacy that the games left behind. And LA will probably still have some challenges. Nothing's perfect, even with the ADA Act here, but I mean, we start on such a different level. So I bet the IPC then sees different opportunities for accessibility, and they don't have to start from square one with the US. So it's really good that that's part of the mission of the IPC, and hopefully this keeps continuing to grow.
It'll be interesting to see what challenges Salt Lake City faces because winter is so, when we were in Beijing, we were joking about how places just had cardboard down over the snow and that was your accessibility. When you've got ADA, you've got a lot of newer builds in Salt Lake City. What challenges and opportunities are they seeing there rather than, oh, we need to put wider doors or you need the things at the crosswalks with sound, some of those kind of lower hanging fruit.
Mhm.
Well, it's done. Okay, now what can we do to be better?
Interesting. Well, we know people at Salt Lake City, so I'm putting that higher up on the list because it'd be interesting to see. Yeah, what do they have to do, and what can they do, and where can they be a leader in accessible sport or accessible tourism? But back to Milan and its venue. Speaking of accessibility, Daniel Jonas Roche reports in the Architect's newspaper that the Arena Santa Giulia hockey stadium in Milan is due to be completed in December 2025.
That's a little close.
That's probably well, if they do it in the beginning of December, then you've got a month, like 7 weeks or so before you really need it for the games. Really, really need it for the games. But it is cutting it close. This will be a 16,000 seat venue that will be useful in Milan, they've said. It does sound like the Adidas Arena in Paris, where they needed something that was more mid-sized, where they could definitely fit in the crowds. They could use it for concerts. They can use it for sports. They could use it for other mixed uses. There will be a big piazza outside. There's going to be a speakeasy lounge.
With the official Prosecco, no doubt.
Right. Well, I wonder what's going to be finished. If the target is December, what will be done? What will not be done? Will the speakeasy lounge be done so that hospitality has a place? A shishi place for hospitality?
The bathrooms better be done or we're in trouble.
We're in trouble regardless. Come on.
Because this is one of the hockey arenas. It's not like the biathlon that's so far away that we probably won't get to. We're going to be in this building if it exists.
So yeah, I am very curious as to what will be done on time and what is going to be not smoke and mirrors, but this is obviously not finished yet. Because I do not trust that it will be done and spanking shiny new. I just fear that it's going to be like a lot of places, a lot of host cities where they barely got stuff up at the last minute. Or like Beijing, when we found out they were taping wallpaper to the walls. If you are a shoe person, look for some Nike Olympic shoes to come out next year. According to Brendan Dunn, reporting in Complex, the Nike Air Max 96 Olympic will be back for 2026. This was originally a 2004 release that has a white base with horizontal stripes and accents in black, blue, green, red, and yellow to mimic the Olympic ring colors. The 2004 version also had these visible gel or air pockets in the base, if you remember that look.
I have like the most basic sneakers ever. I am such not a sneakerhead, but I'm sitting here going, "Oh yeah, that sounds cool."
The new version is slated for spring 2026, which means it will come out between January and March of that year. For those of you who are interested, the new shoes style code is IB7872-100. And then the site House of Heat notes that the shoes will probably retail for $190.
You know, it'll be interesting to see if at Media Day or in their kit, the Olympians get these early.
Good question.
That would be good swag. Welcome to TKFLASTAN.
It is the time of the show where we check in with our team, Keep the Flame Alive. These are past guests and listeners of the show who make up our citizenship of our very own country named TKFLASTAN. First up,
Alison Levine won silver in the individual event and gold in the pairs in the BC4 category at the Santiago World Boccia Challenger.
Kim Rohde is back on the ISSF World Cup shooting circuit at the World Cup in Buenos Aires. She placed second in skeet, and then she won the next World Cup event in Lima. Kim now has 26 career World Cup wins. She is one behind all-time leader Raymond Debovic from Slovenia.
And at the last IOC session, Dick Pound received the Olympic Order, which is the IOC's highest honor. Well deserved.
And that is going to do it for this episode. Let us know your thoughts on how sports federations are using data to win the medal race.
And we love hearing from you. You can chat with us and other listeners on our Facebook group, Keep the Flame Alive Podcast. Email us at flamealivepod@gmail.com. And the voicemail and text line is always open at 208-352-6348. That's 208-FLAME-IT. If you need more Olympics and Paralympics in your life, and who doesn't, sign up for our newsletter at flamealivepod.com. We'll have a link to that in the show notes.
May is Mental Health Awareness Month, so we are putting together some special episodes that focus on mental health topics. Next week, we will kick that off with our interview with figure skater Gracie Gold. So excited about that.
Another little baby born from my trip to the World Figure Skating Championships.
Exactly. So be sure to tune into that next week. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, keep the flame alive.